The building looked completely different at night. During the day, it was full of noise. Phones ringing, people talking, footsteps echoing across the polished floors. But once the sun went down, everything changed. The lights dimmed, the halls grew quiet, and the only sound left was a faint hum machine still running somewhere in the background. That was when he began his work. He always entered through the back door, the same way every evening. His steps were calm, almost silent, as if he didn't want to disturb the stillness around him. In one hand, he carried a small worn-out bag. In the other, a set of keys that softly clinked with each step. His clothes were simple, clean but clearly old. Nothing about him stood out at first glance. Most people in the building didn't even know his name. To them, he was just a janitor. Someone who came in after hours, cleaned up their mess, and disappeared before morning. But if anyone had taken the time to watch him closely, they would have seen something different. He didn't rush through his work. He didn't cut corners. Every task he did it with care. If a chair was out of place, he adjusted it neatly. If there was a stain on the floor, he didn't just wipe it once and move on. He stayed until it was completely gone. If something was broken, he didn't ignore it. He tried to fix it, even if it wasn't part of his job. That evening was no different. He moved slowly through the hallway, pushing his cleaning cart beside him. The wheels made a soft rolling sound against the smooth floor. He stopped near a waiting area where one of the chairs had a loose leg. Most people would have left it for maintenance, but not him. He bent down, placing his bag gently on the floor. From inside, he pulled out a small toolkit. It wasn't fancy, just a few basic tools he had collected over time. He carefully turned the chair upside down and began tightening the screws. His hands worked with quiet focus, as if nothing else in the world mattered at that moment. A few floors above, a black car pulled up outside the building. The driver quickly stepped out and opened the back door. A woman stepped out, her presence calm but powerful. She was known by many, respected by most, and feared by some. Her time was valuable, and she rarely visited the office this late. But tonight, she had. She walked inside with steady steps, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Even the security staff straightened up as she passed. She acknowledged no one, her mind focused on work that had kept her busy all day. The elevator ride was silent. When the doors opened, she stepped into the quiet hallway, expecting it to be empty. But it wasn't. Her eyes shifted slightly as she noticed movement near the waiting area. She paused, just for a moment, watching from a distance. It was the janitor. He didn't notice her. He was still focused on the chair, carefully tightening the last screw before setting it back upright. Once he finished, he pressed down on it gently, making sure it was stable. Only then did he nod to himself, satisfied. Something about that small action caught her attention. It was such a simple thing, something most people wouldn't even think twice about. Yet he had taken the time to fix it properly, even though no one was there to see it. No one to praise him. No one to reward him. She didn't say anything. She simply stood there for a second longer, observing. Then she walked past him. He stepped aside politely, lowering his gaze slightly as she passed, a quiet gesture of respect. He didn't try to speak to her, didn't try to impress her. To him, she was just another person walking through the building, and that somehow made her notice him even more. She continued down the hallway, but her mind didn't move on as quickly as her steps did. There was something unusual about him, not in the way he looked, not in what he wore, but in the way he carried himself. There was no frustration in his movements, no sign of resentment, just quiet focus. Later that night, as she finished her work and prepared to leave, she passed through the same hallway again. He was still there. This time, he was cleaning the glass panels near the office doors. Slowly, carefully, making sure there were no streaks left behind. His reflection moved along with him, steady and patient. Again, he didn't notice her at first. And again, she paused. She wasn't used to pausing. Her life was always moving, meeting decisions, deadlines. She didn't have time to stand and watch someone clean a window. Yet here she was, for reasons she couldn't fully explain. As she walked past him again, he stepped back politely, giving her space. Their eyes met for just a brief second. His expression was calm. respectful, but not nervous, not desperate, just simple. She gave a small nod and continued walking. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The next evening, she found herself thinking about him again, not in an important way, not like a business deal or a major decision, just a quiet thought in the back of her mind. She returned to the building late again, and without meaning to, her eyes searched the hallway. He was there. This time, he was organizing a stack of files someone had left scattered across a desk. He aligned them neatly, making sure everything was in order before moving on. No one had asked him to do that. He simply did it. Day after day, she began noticing the same pattern. He always arrived on time, always worked quietly, always left exactly at the same hour. And that was something that stood out. Most workers stayed longer if they could, especially those who needed the extra money. But he didn't. He finished his work and left. No delays, no lingering, as if something or someone was waiting for him. That thought stayed with her. One evening, she deliberately stayed a little later than usual, not for work, but to see what he would do. The building grew quieter. The last few employees left. The lights dimmed further, and right on time, he packed his tools. He wiped his hands with a small cloth, placed everything neatly back into his bag, and took one last look around to make sure everything was in order. Then he walked toward the exit. No rushing, no distraction, just a steady, purposeful walk. She watched from a distance. Something about that moment felt different. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, a question she couldn't quite answer. Why did he leave exactly on time every single day? What was waiting for him outside those doors? The next few seconds would decide something she hadn't planned. He stepped out of the building. She hesitated for only a moment. Then she followed. Not too close, not obvious, just enough to keep him in sight, for the first time in a long while. She wasn't in control of the situation. She didn't know where this would lead. She didn't know what she would find, but something inside her told her to keep going. And so she did. As he walked down the quiet street, unaware of the eyes following him, the distance between their worlds slowly began to close. And neither of them knew that this simple moment was about to change everything. The night air felt cooler outside the building. The city was still awake, but in a quieter way. Streetlights cast long shadows on the road, and the sound of distant traffic mixed with the soft rustling of leaves. He walked at a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow, as if he followed the same path 100 times before. She stayed behind him, careful not to be noticed. This was not something she had ever done before. Following someone like this felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but something inside her kept pushing her forward. He didn't look back even once. After a few minutes, he reached a bus stop. It was simple, with a metal bench and a faded sign. A few people were already waiting there, some looking at their phones, others just staring into space, tired from a long day. He stood quietly to one side, holding a small bag close to him. There was no impatience in his face, no frustration, just calm acceptance. She stopped at a distance, pretending to check something on her phone while keeping him in view. This alone surprised her. She had built a life where she never had to wait for anything. Cars were always ready. Meetings were always arranged around her time. But here he was, waiting without complaint. When the bus arrived, the doors opened with a soft hiss. People stepped in one by one. He waited his turn, then climbed in, paying his fare before moving toward the back. She hesitated for a second. Then, without thinking too much, she followed. The inside of the bus was crowded but quiet. The lights were dim, and the seats were worn from years of use. She wasn't used to this kind of environment. It felt unfamiliar, almost distant from the world she lived in every day. He took a seat near the window. She stood a few rows behind, holding onto the rail as the bus started moving again. As the city lights passed by, she kept her eyes on him. He didn't do anything unusual. He didn't use his phone, didn't talk to anyone. He simply looked out the window, lost in his own thoughts. There was something peaceful about the way he sat there. After some time, the bus turned into a quieter area. The tall buildings slowly disappeared, replaced by smaller houses and narrow streets. The lights here were softer, the noise much lower. When the bus stopped again, he stood up and stepped off. She followed once more. This part of the city felt completely different. The roads were not as clean. The buildings were older, but there was a sense of life here that she rarely noticed in her own world. He walked down a narrow street, passing by small shops that were beginning to close for the night. A few children played near the corner, their laughter echoing softly in the air. Then he stopped in front of a small apartment building. It wasn't impressive. The paint on the walls was slightly faded, and the entrance door looked old. But he didn't hesitate. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a key, and walked inside. She slowed down, staying outside. For a moment, she wondered if she had gone too far. This was his personal space, his private life. But the curiosity inside her had already taken over. She moved closer, careful not to make any noise. One of the windows on the ground floor had its curtains slightly open. A soft yellow light glowed from inside, and that's when she saw it. He was no longer the quiet janitor from the office. Inside that small apartment, he was something completely different. A little girl ran toward him the moment he entered. She threw her arms around him tightly, as if she had been waiting all day for this moment. He smiled. It wasn't the polite, small smile she had seen at the office. This one was real, warm, full of life. He bent down and lifted her gently, holding her close as she laughed. For a second, she felt something shift inside her. She stayed still, watching quietly. He put his bag down and walked into the small kitchen area. The apartment was simple, with only the basic things needed to live. But it was clean, organized. Every item had its place. The little girl followed him closely, talking nonstop about her day. He listened carefully, nodding, smiling, asking small questions. He didn't look tired anymore, even though he had just finished hours of work. There was a new energy in him now. He started preparing dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple meal, but the way he did it mattered. He made sure everything was just right. He even tasted the food before serving it, as if he wanted to make sure she would enjoy it. They sat together at a small table. She noticed how he made sure the little girl had enough food before taking anything for himself. He encouraged her to eat, gently reminding her when she got distracted. They talked and laughed in between bites. It was such a small moment, but it felt bigger than anything she had seen that day. After dinner, he helped her with her schoolwork, sitting beside her, explaining things patiently, even when she made mistakes. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration, only patience, only care. Time seemed to slow down as she watched. She had seen many families in her life, but something about this felt different. There was no pressure here, no expectations, just a quiet bond that didn't need to be explained. When the homework was done, he cleaned up the dishes while she played nearby. Then he joined her for a few minutes, sitting on the floor, listening to her stories, laughing at things that probably didn't make much sense to anyone else. But to him, they mattered. Everything she said mattered. Later, he tucked her into bed. He adjusted her blanket carefully, making sure she was comfortable. She said something softly, and he smiled, gently brushing her hair back before turning off the light. He stayed there for a moment longer, just watching her, making sure she was asleep. Only then did he step away. The room grew quiet again. He returned to the small living area and sat down. And for the first time that night, she saw the tiredness return to his face. His shoulders dropped slightly. His eyes closed for a brief moment. It was as if he had been holding everything in until now. But even then, he didn't complain, didn't sigh, didn't show regret, just quiet exhaustion. She felt something heavy in her chest. She had everything money could buy: comfort, power, freedom. But this was something else. Something she couldn't measure. Something she couldn't control. She took a step back from the window. For a moment, she didn't know what to think. This was not what she expected to find. There was no secret, no hidden agenda, just a simple life. A father, a daughter, and a kind of happiness that didn't need wealth. As she slowly walked away from the building, her mind felt full. Questions, thoughts, emotions, everything mixed together. She looked back one last time. The light in the apartment was still on. And for some reason, she knew this was not the last time she would come here. Because now, it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper. Something she didn't fully understand yet. But she knew one thing for sure. This story was only beginning. The next morning, the building returned to its usual rhythm. People walked in with coffee cups in their hands, talking about meetings, deadlines, and plans for the day. The noise filled every corner again, just like it always did. But for her, something had changed. She sat in her office, looking at a document on her desk, but her mind was somewhere else. The numbers in front of her blurred together. For the first time in a long while, work was not the only thing on her mind. She kept thinking about what she had seen the night before. That small apartment, that little girl, and the man who seemed like two completely different people depending on where he was. At the office, he was quiet, almost invisible, but at home, he was everything. A provider, a teacher, a source of comfort. It didn't make sense to her. Or maybe it did, and that was what unsettled her the most. She leaned back slightly, letting out a slow breath. Then she pressed a button on her desk. Within seconds, someone entered the room. She didn't look up immediately. Her voice remained calm. "Do we have records of all the support staff working in the building?" "Yes," came the reply. "I want details on the night shift janitor, the one assigned to the upper floors." There was a small pause. "Of course." She nodded slightly. "Keep it simple." The person left without asking questions. She didn't want anything complicated. She wasn't trying to investigate him like a problem. She just wanted to understand. Later that day, a small file was placed on her desk. She opened it. There wasn't much inside. A basic profile, employment records, a few notes from supervisors. It said he had been working there for several years. Never late, never absent without reason. No complaints from anyone. There was a short line that stood out. "Refuses assistance beyond standard benefits." She read it twice. Refuses assistance. That wasn't something she saw often. Most people asked for more when they could. Higher pay, better hours, extra support. But he didn't. She closed the file slowly. That evening, she stayed later again. This time, she didn't need to look for him. She knew exactly where he would be. He was in the same hallway, cleaning the floor near the offices. The soft sound of the mop moving back and forth filled the quiet space. She walked closer this time, not hiding her presence. He noticed her and stepped aside immediately. "Good evening," he said politely. His voice was calm, steady. "Good evening," she replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke again. She wasn't used to this kind of silence. Normally, people filled silence quickly around her, trying to say the right thing, trying to impress her. But he didn't. He simply waited. "You've been working here for a long time," she said. "Yes," he answered. "A few years." "You don't miss a day." He gave a small, simple smile. "I try not to." There was no pride in his tone, no attempt to stand out, just a quiet statement. She studied his face for a moment. "Do you like your work?" The question seemed to catch him slightly off guard, not because it was difficult, but because it was unexpected. "It's honest work," he said after a short pause. That answer stayed with her. Honest work. Not easy work. Not enjoyable work. Just honest. She nodded once, then turned and walked away. But her thoughts didn't leave him. Over the next few days, she found herself watching more closely, not in a way that would make him uncomfortable, but enough to notice things others ignored. She saw how he always picked up things others left behind, how he arranged desks that had been left messy, how he quietly fixed small problems before anyone else even noticed them. One afternoon, she overheard a conversation between two employees near the break area. They were talking about him. "He never takes help," one of them said. "I tried once," the other replied. "He just smiled and said he's fine." "Strange," the first one said. "Most people would take whatever they can get." She didn't step in, but she listened. That confirmed what she had read. He wasn't just quiet. He was independent. Later that week, something changed. It started small. She noticed he looked more tired than usual. Not in an obvious way. Most people wouldn't have seen it, but she did. His movements were a little slower. His focus still there, but his energy slightly lower. At first, she didn't think much of it. But the next day, it was the same. And the day after that, something wasn't right. That evening, she didn't wait. She followed him again. The same bus stop, the same quiet ride, the same streets. But this time, when he entered the apartment, something felt different. The light inside was dimmer. The laughter she had seen before was missing. She moved closer to the window again, her steps careful and quiet. Inside, the little girl was lying on the couch. A blanket covered her, and her face looked pale. He was sitting beside her, gently placing a damp cloth on her forehead. His movements were slow, careful. His expression had changed. The calm was still there, but now it was mixed with worry. She watched as he checked her temperature, his hand resting lightly against her skin. He spoke softly to her, his voice low and reassuring. "It's okay," he said. "You'll feel better soon." The little girl nodded weakly. He stood up and walked to the kitchen, preparing something warm. "Soup, maybe?" He tasted it before bringing it back, just like before. But this time there was no laughter, only quiet concern. He helped her sit up, supported her gently as she took a few small bites. "Just a little more," he encouraged. She tried, then slowly leaned back again. He adjusted the blanket, making sure she was comfortable. For a moment, he looked away, and that's when she saw it, the crack in his strength. His eyes closed briefly. His shoulders dropped. It was only for a second, but it was enough. He turned back quickly, as if he didn't want her to see that side of him, even though she was asleep, even though no one was watching. Or at least, he thought no one was. He stayed by her side the entire time. Hours passed. He didn't leave, didn't rest. Every few minutes, he checked on her again, adjusted the blanket, touched her forehead, whispered something soft. The room was quiet except for those small moments. And outside the window, she stood still, watching everything, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Helpless. She had built a life where problems could be solved quickly. Money could fix most things. Time could be managed. But this was different. This was a father sitting beside his sick child, doing everything he could with what little he had. No shortcuts, no control, just care, just love. Late into the night, the little girl finally fell into a deeper sleep. Her breathing became steady. He sat there, still watching her, making sure. Only when he was certain she was okay did he slowly stand up. He walked a few steps away, and then he stopped, his back turned, his head lowered slightly. His hand covered his face for a moment. He didn't make a sound, but she knew he was holding everything in. The fear, the worry, the exhaustion, all of it, alone. She felt her chest tighten. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to do. She couldn't walk in, couldn't interrupt, couldn't offer help without changing everything. So she stayed where she was, watching, understanding, and slowly realizing something she had never truly understood before. Strength didn't always look powerful. Sometimes it looked like this, quiet, tired, but still standing, still trying. After a while, she stepped back from the window. The night felt heavier now. As she walked away, her mind was no longer filled with questions. It was filled with something else, something deeper, respect, and something even stronger, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Care. She looked back one last time. The light was still on, and she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay a silent observer anymore. Not after seeing this. Not after understanding what he was carrying every single day. Something had to change. And this time, she would be part of it. The next morning felt different for her. The office was still the same. The people were still moving quickly. And the work still needed to be done. But her focus was no longer fully inside those walls. Her thoughts kept going back to what she had seen the night before. The quiet room, the sick child, the man sitting beside her, refusing to leave even for a moment. She kept replaying those images in her mind while staring at her screen, but nothing she saw there mattered much anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt something stronger than responsibility. Concern, not for a project, not for a deal, but for a person. She closed the file she was working on and leaned back in her chair. The silence in her office felt heavier than usual. After a long pause, she pressed a button. "Call maintenance supervisor," she said. A few minutes later, the supervisor stood in front of her desk. She kept her tone calm. "I want to make a few changes in the support staff system," she said. The supervisor nodded, waiting. She hesitated for only a second before continuing. "There are employees working night shifts. Some of them may need extra support, better health coverage, and emergency assistance if required." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Make it happen quietly," she added. "No announcements. No attention." He nodded again and left. But even after he left, she didn't feel satisfied, because deep down, she knew this wasn't enough. That evening, she did something she had never done before. She left the building earlier than usual, but instead of going home, she waited near the exit. She wasn't sure why. She just knew she had to see him again. When his shift ended, she saw him come out to the side door, just like always. His steps were slow but steady. He looked more tired than before. She didn't approach him immediately. Instead, she followed at a distance like before. He reached the bus stop and waited quietly. The same routine, the same silence. But something about him felt heavier today. When the bus arrived, he got on. She followed again. The ride felt longer this time. Or maybe it just felt that way because her mind was restless. When they reached a familiar neighborhood, she noticed something different. He didn't walk straight to his apartment. He stopped at a small pharmacy. She watched from across the street as he went inside. A few minutes later, he came out holding a small bag. Medicine, that's all she needed to see. Her heart tightened slightly. She followed him again. When he entered the apartment, she stayed outside, but this time she didn't just look through the window. She waited. Minutes passed. Then she heard it, a soft call from inside, followed by his voice, calm but tired. "It's okay. Just rest." She closed her eyes for a moment, then slowly opened them again. This was not just illness. This was struggle. The kind that didn't stop. The kind that didn't wait for convenience. The kind that continued even when no one was watching. She stepped back from the window, and for the first time, she made a decision without thinking like a business leader. She thought like a human being. The next day, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. She called one of her trusted assistants. "I need information on all support staff families," she said. The assistant looked confused for a moment. "Families, ma'am?" "Yes," she replied. "Children, dependents, anyone they care for." He hesitated, but nodded. "I want full details within 2 days." "Yes, ma'am." But this time, she didn't wait 2 days. That evening, she came back to the building again. And this time, she was ready. She had a small folder with her. Not official documents, just notes, basic details she had quietly collected through trusted channels. She waited near the hallway where he usually worked. When he arrived, he noticed her immediately. He stopped for a moment. "Good evening," he said politely, like always. "Good evening," she replied. But this time, she didn't move away. She stayed there. There was a long silence between them. Finally, she spoke. "I know about your daughter," she said softly. The words hit the air differently. He didn't react immediately, just looked at her, calm, but surprised. After a moment, he spoke. "I don't know what you mean." She didn't push. Instead, she lowered her voice. "I saw her. I know she has not been well." He looked down slightly. There was no anger in his face, only quiet discomfort. He didn't like that, she knew. That was clear. "I manage," he said simply. She nodded slowly. "I'm not here to question you," she said, or interfere. Another pause. "I just want to help." He shook his head slightly. "I don't need help." The words were polite, but firm. She expected that answer, so she didn't argue. Instead, she said something different. "Then let me ask you something." He looked at her again. "If your daughter needed something urgent tonight, something you couldn't afford immediately, would you still refuse help?" Silence. A long one. For the first time, he didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes shifted away. Because the truth was not easy to say. She didn't push further. She simply placed a folder on a nearby desk. I arranged something, she said. Not for you. Not for me. For her. He didn't touch the folder, but he didn't walk away either. I spoke to the company medical partners, she continued. Full coverage. Emergency access. No delay. No approval waiting time. He looked at her. Still quiet. Still controlled. But something inside him was clearly moving. I didn't ask for this, he said finally. I know, she replied. Another silence followed. This one longer. He looked at the folder again. Then away. Then at the floor. It was clear he was struggling with it. Not because he didn't need it, but because accepting help meant something deeper. It meant admitting he couldn't do everything alone. And for someone who had carried responsibility for so long, that was not easy. I don't like favors, he said quietly. This is not a favor, she replied. It's support that should have already been there. He didn't respond. But this time, he didn't refuse either. That was the first shift. Small, but real. She didn't push further that night. She simply nodded once and walked away. But as she left, she knew something had changed. He didn't say no, and that meant everything was no longer the same. Later that night, she sat in her car for a long time before going home. She wasn't thinking about business anymore. She was thinking about him, about the child, about the silence he carried every day, and about how long someone could survive like that without breaking. For the first time, she didn't see him as just an employee. She saw him as someone carrying too much alone, and she knew she couldn't stay distant anymore. Not after this. Not anymore. Because now, stepping back would feel like ignoring something she could no longer unsee. And that realization stayed with her long into the night. That night, she couldn't sleep properly. Even after reaching home, changing clothes and sitting in silence, her mind kept going back to the same image again and again. A man standing in a quiet hallway, refusing help not because he didn't need it, but because he didn't want to feel weak. And a small child, resting on a thin couch, fighting illness without understanding why life sometimes becomes so hard. She had seen many things in her life, difficult decisions, high-pressure situations, people struggling in different ways. But this was different. This was not about business. It was about survival in silence. The next morning, she made a decision. Not a small one, a clear one. She would meet him properly, not as someone watching from a distance, not as someone sending quiet help, but face-to-face with honesty. She arrived at the building earlier than usual. The air felt still, and the hallways were almost empty. Only a few lights were on, reflecting softly on the polished floor. She asked for him. When he was called, he came as he always did. Calm steps, simple posture, quiet presence. But something about him felt more careful now, like he already knew this conversation would be different. "Good evening," he said politely. She nodded. "Can we talk for a moment?" she asked. He looked at her for a second, then nodded again. They walked a little aside, away from the main hallway. There was no crowd here, only silence. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. She was not someone who struggled to speak in important moments. But this time, she chose her words carefully. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable," she said slowly, "but I need be honest with you." He listened without interruption. "I know more about your situation than I should," she continued. "And I also know you've been refusing help for a long time." He didn't react strongly, only a small shift in his expression. Not anger, not surprise anymore, just acceptance that this moment had come. She continued, "I'm not here to control your life, and I'm not here to judge your choices." A pause, "But I can't ignore what I've seen." He looked down slightly as if thinking. She took a small breath before speaking again. "Your daughter deserves care without delay. You deserve support without struggling alone every single day." He stayed silent. This silence was heavier than before, because this time it wasn't just observation. It was direct truth. After a moment, he spoke quietly. "I have managed until now." "I know," she said, "and I respect that." Another pause. "But managing doesn't mean it's easy." He didn't answer that, because there was no simple answer. She reached into her folder and placed the document in his hand. He didn't open it immediately. "I arranged something official," she said. "Not personal, not charity. It's company-backed support for staff families." He looked at the paper, but still didn't read it. "I didn't ask for this," he said again, softly. "I know," she replied again, just as softly. This time, there was no pressure in her voice, only understanding. He finally opened the document. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Medical coverage, emergency access, immediate approval for treatment. Everything written in simple, clear terms. He stopped reading for a moment. His hand tightened slightly on the paper. She didn't interrupt. She waited, because this part was not about convincing. It was about acceptance. After a long silence, he spoke. "Why are you doing this?" It was not anger. It was confusion, real confusion. She looked at him directly. "Because I saw you," she said. He didn't respond. She continued. "Not just your work, not just your role in the building." A pause. "I saw how you live, how you care for your daughter, how you never complain even when it's clearly difficult." He looked away, not because he disagreed, but because hearing it felt uncomfortable. She lowered her voice slightly. "You shouldn't have to carry everything alone." For a moment, the hallway felt completely still. No footsteps, no voices, just two people standing in silence. Then he spoke quietly. "I don't want pity." Her response was immediate. "This is not pity." Another pause. "It's respect." That word stayed between them for a moment. Respect, not charity, not sympathy. Respect. He slowly looked at her again. His expression was still guarded, but something had shifted slightly, because respect was different. Respect did not look down. Respect stood beside. She continued. "I didn't come here to change your life in one day." A small pause. "I just don't want you to struggle with things that don't need to be this hard." He looked at the paper again, this time longer, more carefully. Then he spoke in a lower voice. "If I accept this, it changes things." "Yes," she said honestly. "It does." Another silence, this one deeper. He thought about it, not just the offer, but what it meant. Years of managing everything alone. Years of refusing help. Years of believing that asking would make him weaker. And now, one decision sitting in his hand. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I can accept it easily," he said. She nodded. "I don't expect you to." That was all she said. No pressure, no push, just space. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, he folded the document and held it in his hand. Not fully accepted, not rejected, just kept. A small step, but a real one. She understood that, and she didn't try to push further. Instead, she said something simple. "Take your time." He nodded slightly. Then, after a pause, he spoke. "Thank you for thinking about her." That was the first time his voice softened slightly. Not much, but enough. She didn't respond with words. She only gave a small nod, because sometimes words were not needed. He turned to leave, but stopped for a moment. Then he spoke again without looking back. "I still don't like depending on others." She replied calmly. "Then don't think of it as depending." A pause. "Think of it as making sure she doesn't suffer because of pride." That sentence stayed in the air after he left. And this time he didn't argue. He simply walked away, slowly, quietly, holding something in his hand that he had spent years refusing. She watched him go, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was chasing something unclear anymore. Something had shifted, not fully solved, not fully understood, but real, and enough to change the direction of everything that was about to come next. Because now, this was no longer just observation. It was connection. And sometimes connection changes everything without asking permission.